Lep dober večer vsem, ki ste se odzvali vabilu Katoliškega inštituta na nocojšnji večer. V naši sredi lepo pozdravljam gospoda doktorja Eberharda Schockenhoffa, mojega kolega z področja moralne teologije, kar sem še posebej vesel. Moram reči tudi, da zahvaljujoč kolego Romanju Globokarju, ki žal nocoj ni navzoč, je gospod profesor med nami. Naj povezuje kar nekaj stvari, oba smo leta 53 rojena, on sicer v Stuttgartu, jaz pa v Sloveniji, ne? Drugače pa teološko izobrazbo je naredil v Rimu, potem nadaljeval seveda v Nemčiji, v Tübingenu in pa bil posvečen v duhovnika leta 78. Leta 90 pa je postal profesor moralne teologije na Univerzi v Regensburgu, od leta 94 pa na Univerzi v Freiburgu. Je tudi član Komisije za ekumenski dialog in Nemškega sveta za etiko, od leta 2009 pa je redni član Akademije znanosti v Heidelbergu. Je avtor številnih del in mi imamo to srečo, da smo nedavno tega dobili pri Celjski Mohorjevi družbi knjigo Etika življenja gospoda profesorja, v kateri razlaga temeljna načela in konkretna vprašanja, predvsem z področja, lahko rečemo, bioetike. Torej, na začetku nocojšnjega večera bomo najprej dali njemu besedo in zatem bomo mi trije postavljali vprašanja. Dogovorili smo se za trilingvistiko, se pravi, govorili bomo slovensko, angleško, nemško, tako kakor bo bolj ustrezalo. Tudi gospod profesor je rekel, če bi tudi njemu bolj ustrezalo, da bo povedal kaj v nemščini, bi potem jaz prevajal, sicer pa bo večina konverzacije tekla v angleščini. Herr Professor, herzlich willkommen unter uns und am Anfang gebe ich das Wort Ihnen. Vielleicht sagen Sie am Anfang ein paar Worte und anschließend stellen wir dann die Fragen.
Yes, thank you for the invitation to this dialogue evening. I'm a Catholic priest. That was the first decision in my life, and then the second was to go into the theology. That was not only my own decision, but also this of others. For example, my bishop in this time, when he asked me if I would have the intention to do a theological doctorate, I answered him, yes, that would be very good. I would really like to do that. Before I studied at Rome, I did my license in moral theology with the same professor, Klaus Demmer, and after 3 years of pastoral work in my diocese in the cities of Ellwangen and Stuttgart, I wrote the theological doctorate on the theory of virtue and his theological and anthropological dimensions in St. Thomas Aquinas. That was my doctorate thesis, and after that I did the second thesis. We call this habilitation in Germany, and this had the object of an issue of the first period of the theology, named on the great theologian Origen. I don't know how you know him. Origen. On the theory of liberty in Origen. That was his nucleus of his thinking, the freedom of man and the relation between the freedom of man and the freedom of God. And this, I think, it's a very, very important issue for the theological thinking, even for today. Then, as he just told, I started my work as a professor of moral theology at the University of Regensburg, and 4 years later I changed to Freiburg, and since 20 years this is the city, the university, where I am doing my work as moral theologian. For me, it was always important to have not only the ecclesiastical background, but also the civil society, the secular society and its conflicts as a counterpart for my work. And I had a very great luck when it's 15 years now, there was founded the National Ethical Council, or Council on Bioethical Questions in Germany, and I was called to become a member of this council. This was really a great luck, because this was the platform for this dialogue with all the various positions which are present in the ethical discourse of the secular society. And this we were 2 Catholic members. The other was the bishop of my own diocese. Now it's another bishop of a Bavarian diocese. And we have 2 members of the Protestant theology. So we were just a group of 4 people of the Christian ethics. So that gave us the possibility to bring into the discussion our arguments, and that I found was very important. And this book was in a certain way, even when I started with the work just before, in a certain way is the result of this possibility to give rational arguments for a Catholic position on biomedical ethics. So for a first answer, that may be enough.
Thank you. Ich werde zuerst in Slowenisch meine Frage stellen, also dass die Publikum versteht. Das wird vielleicht etwas länger, mit einer kurzen Einführung, und dann mache ich das. Moje vprašanje se bo nanašalo na predpostavke, na katerih on gradi moralno teologijo. Slišali ste, kar je študiral, in prej sva tudi se pogovarjala, doktorat je delal pri profesorju Alfonsu Auerju. Alfons Auer je bil moralni teolog v Nemčiji, ki je po drugem Vatikanskem koncilu poskrbel za tako imenovano menjavo paradigme. Iz klasičnega razumevanja naravnega zakona v zelo statični obliki je s pomočjo seveda nemške filozofske tradicije prešel na avtonomno moralo in je tudi avtor tega pojma avtonomna morala. Ko smo midva študirala, gospod profesor v Nemčiji, jaz pa v Rimu, je diskusija okrog avtonomne morale bila pravzaprav ena od najbolj živahnih diskusij. Z tem vprašanjem avtonomne morale je povezano vprašanje razumevanja narave in osebe. In on tudi v svojem prvem delu knjige nekako postavlja temelje vsem svojim naslednjim poglavjem, posebej še tistim poglavjem, ki zadevajo bioetično problematiko. Zato bo moje vprašanje šlo v tej smeri, kako njemu, recimo, se po vsem tem zdaj kaže problem tega, recimo, scholastičnega, tomističnega razumevanja naravnega zakona in pa novega nastavka za moralno teologijo, tako imenovane avtonomne morale, in kako je ta dva paradigmatična vidika uspel povezati in združevati znotraj pojma osebe in pojma narave, in s tem na nek način to vprašanje tudi ponuja temelj, osnovo za to, kako sploh razumevati potem v nadaljevanju vprašanja, ki so povezana z ali bioetiko ali pa drugimi vprašanji. To bo moje vprašanje, tako zdaj bom pa v nemščini še malo to povedal. Herr Professor, Sie haben in Ihrem Studium sowohl thomistische Theologie grundsätzlich studiert und Naturrecht beim heiligen Thomas von Aquin gründlich wissenschaftlich erarbeitet. Andererseits haben Sie sich bei Ihrem Dr. Vater Alfons Auer mit autonome Moral auseinandergesetzt, und wie ich auch in Ihrem Buch sehe, haben Sie dann im Prinzip diese zwei Strömungen, eine traditionelle, eine neue, also zwei Paradigmen, die so in die Geschichte der katholischen Moraltheologie präsent sind, haben sie versucht, das in eine Art neue Synthese sowohl in das Wort Person wie auch in das Wort Natur reinzubringen. Vielleicht erklären Sie etwas breiter und mehr, wie sehen Sie diese Strömungen, die im Prinzip nach dem Zweiten Vatikanischen Konzil auch in der katholischen Moraltheologie wie wir wissen, zu einer Art von Dissens hingeführt haben?
Yes, I will try to give an answer to this real fundamental question. The problem is that the theory of natural law, which was widespread accepted in the Catholic Church in the 19th and 20th century, is not identical with the theory of the practical reason and the natural inclinations at the level of St. Thomas Aquinas. His ethics and the neo-scholastical natural law theory was not the same. And that was a result of the historical research of the 20th century, that this what was called Thomistic ethics and the ethics of Thomas Aquinas is not the same thing. And where is the difference? That's very important to see where is the difference. As Joseph Ratzinger was a young theologian, he wrote a very intelligent articles. He wrote intelligent articles even later, of course. That's not my point. But in this early period, he shows where was the difficulty of the natural law theory of the Thomistic period of the Church in the 20th century. The difficulty was that, on the one hand, the Church claims that the Catholic moral theory is well grounded and founded on good philosophical arguments, which are open to consent for everyone, for everybody, because these are good rational arguments. They are open for the natural reason. So that was the claim of a wide universal basis which allows to accept to all people of goodwill, as in the later time we said, to accept this. But at the other side, the Church claimed the authority whereas the reason is too weak to give his consensus to the Catholic morality. The Church had the authority to give an authentic interpretation of the natural law. And these two sides were not really on the same line. This was a consensus. And this was the problem of the natural law theory. And when there was the encyclica of Humanae Vitae, with the Church position on artificial contraception, and this was a great crisis for the academical moral theology in many countries, in the United States, in France, in Germany, and in many countries. And the academic moral theology tried to build a new basis of argumentation, because this was clear: the only fact that a certain sentence or a certain moral doctrine belongs to the tradition of the Catholic Church in the secular debate is no good argument. This may be, and it may be important for the identity of the Catholic Church, that may be, but in the secular discussion and in the discussion with the moral philosophy, this is no argument. And as the ongoing discussion within the Church showed, it was no good argument even for many Catholics. So theologians as Alphonse Auer and Josef Fuchs and Franz Böckle in Germany, in this period these were important names, tried to have a better ground for better arguments. And so they tried a reformulation of an ethic based on natural human reason, and not only on natural human reason in a metaphysical context, in an essential thinking, which takes the human nature not embedded in its historical continuation and historical transformations, but as a metaphysical essence nature. But they tried to take seriously the historicity of the human life, that human life and its conditions are changing because they are embedded in cultural forms of life, and even the society, the human society, is changing, and this is important for moral norms too. And on the other hand, to look for a concept of practical reason that takes seriously this historical background of the human existence. And so they elaborated what they called an ethic of autonomy, of human autonomy in a Christian context. And the basic idea was that methodology, we cannot start with our Christian tradition, with the Bible and the church fathers and the doctrine of the popes in the 19th century, but we had to start with the human experience and the sciences of psychology, sociology, and so on, anthropology, who try to reflect this human experience. And then this is the first starting point, that we have to listen what the modern sciences, the humanities, call us about the conditions of our life, of our responsible conduct of human life. And it's clear that an empirical science cannot give the ultimate answer on the normative level, what people ought to do. This is clear. But on the other side, the empirical science give a solid and necessary fundament for the discussion, even moral problems. And the second step, you have to integrate these facts and informations given by the humanities, the empirical science of man, in the light of a systematic anthropology. And for this systematic anthropology, there is important the view of the Bible, of the Catholic tradition, and of philosophical anthropology. That was always in history a proprium of the Catholic moral theology, that it was very open to philosophical elements in his formulation. It was not only a theological ethics, which merely is grounded on specifically theological arguments. That in its tradition was never the case. Only in the 20th century, as a reaction on this sort of ethics of autonomy in a Christian context, there were other authors who formulate a so-called ethics of faith as a reaction. And this ethic of faith should be grounded especially on theological arguments. But this was a reaction which in history of the Catholic moral theology was very late. So I think this is a little bit the story of our discipline of moral theology in the last 40 years perhaps. And what is the function of the revelation and the Christian faith for moral, it has not become without function, of course, but we start not with a critical evaluation of our own tradition, but we start with arguments who are common to others, to the empiricist sciences of man and to moral philosophy and a systematic philosophical anthropology. We start with this, and then when we have a certain result, we try to reprove this result in the light of our tradition, in the context of revelation. And there's a famous formulation of my teacher, Alphonse Auer, who said, from the Christian revelation, there is a threefold function towards an autonomous ethic grounded in natural reason, and this is a critical, integrative, and a stimulating function. And so Catholic ethics must be critical in the context of the secular city, but it must too be open to rational argumentation, which the other people in our society are able to understand. That's the decisive point.
Dankeschön. Jetzt gebe ich weiter das Wort dem Kollegen.
Oh, thank you. I have a couple of questions, but maybe I will continue here. At the beginning of your book, you pose the following interpretation or claim, that at least in this Anglo-Saxon space, the notion of autonomy somehow changed from being like in accordance with the moral law within me and where the will submits to the laws of reason, to autonomy being just a right of an individual for his desires to be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'd like to ask you, where do you see maybe, for example, the philosophical origins of this transformation, and also the societal origins of this transformation that actually brought to a lot of problems in medical ethics as we are facing today?
Yes, I think the philosophical question rises just many centuries ago, because we always had two different traditions which are grounded on the concept of autonomy. The one was the tradition of the German philosophy and the Enlightenment, the continental European tradition. This is the moral thinking of Immanuel Kant, and for him autonomy is not merely the right to have own desires and wishes. On the opposite, for Kant, this means not autonomy but heteronomy. If you only obey to your own desires and not to the reason, and not only to a private reason but to the universal reason, the claims of universal reason, then you remain on a level of heteronomy for Kant. But exactly this was in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. For John Locke, for instance, was the meaning of an autonomous will, that the autonomous person has the will, has the right to pronounce his willings, his desires, and in the context of actual bioethical debate, often this means that she has the right, he or she has the right to pronounce his desires, and to this right there are corresponding duties of others, of the physicians and the care staff of the hospitals, to realize these desires. And these are two extremely different positions of autonomy. And for me it's more or less clear that the Kantian position is this is philosophically valid, and the other I try to criticize. And the second part of your question was where are the conditions in the modern society. And there we have a very interesting phenomena that the goal of personal and social health, of public health in our society is the highest goal you can imagine. This has to do with the transformation of our society and with the secularization of our thinking. But in the secular city, the health is the highest goal, the highest value. We say in Germany, health is not all, but without health, all is nothing. So this points out that it's really on the axiology, on the hierarchical orders of the personal values, this is the undoubted highest value. So that means you may have the best arguments on the philosophical level. If the people become the impression that you are argumentating against health, you have no possibility to convince them. That is, so you must always say you are not arguing against health, but we are arguing for a way to do research for health, which is morally acceptable, but we are not arguing against health. The second thing is that we have, on the ground of biomedical ethics, we have an unreflected utilitarian way of thinking. The utilitarianism as a theory of moral philosophy had originally his central field in the ethics of the human society, in the ethics of human welfare, and in the political ethics. That was his main field. And what is interesting is that in the area of the political ethics, the utilitarianism in its classical form is abandoned because he has no criterion of justice. His central formula, the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, doesn't show a criterion of the contribution of every single person. It's possible to have a greater sum of happiness if you take away a little bit of some people, of the weakened perhaps. And so you have a greater sum at the end, but at the price that the rights, the basic rights of some people are violated. And that is the central problem of an utilitarian ethics, and that's why on the basis in the fields of political ethics it has very much problems and it's widespreadly abandoned. It was the critic of who was the central philosopher? Of Rawls, yes, of Rawls, and it is widely accepted. But on the field of biomedical ethics, the utilitarian way of thinking and of arguing comes out in another end. He re-enters in the debate, and that's a great problem. And I think on the theoretical level, all the critical arguments against the classical form of utilitarianism are still valid. But nonetheless, on the practical level of medical ethics, many peoples, and even many peoples who have a great philosophical erudition, are inclined to accept these arguments because there is correspondence to the result they wish that at the end will be reached. And this is very difficult in this conglomerate of thinkings and personal wishes and desires to have a clear conception.
Maybe now if I can add one question. If we stay in the area of medical ethics, actually I'm very much interested in this intersection of theological, Christian theological ethics and medicine, because for whole history actually, or this Hippocratic tradition and so on, and later on Catholic moral theology and so on, I would say medical ethics was very much tuned with this Catholic thinking, Catholic ethics, which was true, I believe, until 1960s, when this modern medicine started to create totally new medical dilemmas. But then at the beginning of this new medicine, I'm talking especially on Anglo-Saxon environment, theologians or moral theologians, I think were one step ahead of others. But at one point they, I would say, a bit lost this fight for interpretation. And now modern bioethics is very much secular. As you said, it's utilitarian. All the major ethical journals, medical journals in ethics are actually utilitarian. You can get published all the nonsenses you can imagine there, but you couldn't publish there nothing Catholic. What do you think at which point this battle of interpretation was lost for Catholic bioethics in medicine?
So I think we have to accept the situation that in a secular context, the Catholic theology or the Christian theology has no longer any privileges of argumentation. That is the situation. We may regret this, but that is the situation we have to accept. And only if we accept this without anything, we have the chance to be to play a good role in the ethical discourse. That is the first point. And then, where was the starting point of this? It's hardly to say. In the Catholic, on the Catholic side, it was perhaps the problem that Catholic theology, moral theology, was too long concerned with the debates, the inner ecclesiastical debates. That may be true. And on the Protestant side, it may be that the inner Protestant pluralism is too great, that the society can identify the vote of the Protestantism with one vote. So in Germany, there are very Protestant theologians who say the Protestant faith doesn't need unanimity on the camps of in the field of moral convictions, but only the one Protestant faith. But an unanimous conviction on moral problems is not necessary for the Protestant faith. This is the position of freedom. We are the religion of freedom. That is what's our strength. And we show to a pluralistic society how we can share these positions who are present in the pluralistic society within our community of faith. And we show to the society that it's possible to reconcile these different positions. But if this is the only message you have, you can put the question why the civil society should really listen to this message, that all the positions are possible, and within the churches they have the right to be represented and discussed in the same manner as in the civil society. But this, I want to repeat this, we have no chance that the situation before the Second Vatican Council will come back, will ever come back. Our place is the place of the open society, and the transformations which the church structures and the structures of theological thinking will have in future, I am sure, will be even greater than they were in the last centuries. That's...
Okay. Thank you. Second question also related to the foundations of your ethics, of your theory. One of the cornerstones that you offer in the book is this, let's say, new understanding or new interpretation of the anthropocentric view that you defend against biocentric and physiocentric views in this wider area of bioethics. So could you perhaps for the audience in some short sentences explain what this new or old anthropocentric position is, since in many times it gets just rejected out of hand. You know, this is something that we just cannot accept anymore once we become aware of the wider, more sensitivity to a wider circle, like animals or plants or nature as such.
Yes, today we have in environmental ethics many theories who said the great mistake in tradition was, and this mistake in thinking is due to all the crisis we live towards the environment today, that mankind reclaims a central function, a central position within nature. And this is called anthropocentric ethics. And the alternatives could be or a so-called nature ethics, or a biocentric ethics, that means life, the whole life is in the center, or a physical centric ethics, that means there is no center in the system of the nature, but this is a orphan center, the orphan system without center, or polycentric system. So there cannot be any animal or any part in this system of the nature who has a higher value and a special function in comparison with others. And I think that this is not true for two reasons. The first reason is an historical. The analysis is not correct that the Christian faith, that this world is the creation of God, and this world as the creation of God is not in itself sacred. That's the claim, that the world is the creation, but the nature is not sacred, is not in itself the revelation of religious sources. It has not in itself divine qualities. And we had in the perhaps 40 years ago, we had a certain tendency in Christian theology. It was called theology of secularization. And we said the Christian faith is not in opposition to modern technology and modern science, but in reality it stays at the very beginning of modern research and modern science and modern technique, because it was a precondition that the world was regarded, the nature was regarded, not as sacred in itself and as having divine qualities, a revelation of its divine source, but it is secularized. It's the field of research which is given to mankind. And this way to advocate the Christian position, some years later, was turned back, and now it was said the Christian religion is fought. It's due to the Christian religion that we live in the wrong manner towards nature, because it's the Christian anthropocentric view of nature that made it only a mere material for human deconstruction, for human research, and so on. And so the Christians were the Schuldigen. What's yes. And I think this historically is not right, because it's the confusion between the biblical concept of anthropocentrical view of nature and the modern concept of dualism, which goes back, for instance, to the philosopher Descartes. For Descartes, the nature was mere extended reality, and the man was maître et possesseur de la nature, the owner and the possessor of the nature. And this was the starting point of a new attention, of a new dimension, a new relation of man towards nature, but not the biblical anthropocentric view. For the biblical anthropocentric view, man is not in opposition to nature, but he is, first of all, part of the nature. But he is not a part of the nature as any other parts of the nature, but he has a certain function within nature. And he is the master of nature, and he is the responsible master of nature. Nature is given to him, but not only for dominating it and for exploiting it, but he has a responsibility within nature. And it's my conviction that mankind is the own biological form of living which has the possibility to do out this function. Mankind cannot say we want to renounce to our responsibility and want live a certain democratic equality with all other forms of life. This is not possible. And if it's not possible, you should have the courage on the level of theoretical thinking to give a reflection that can explain why this is not possible. And this is why I think the biblical anthropocentric view is, even on a philosophical level, better than its opposite concurrence of a biocentric or physiocentric ethics. And there's another argument, very easy. Even a physiocentric ethics as an ethic will address its message to human person. Humans are the only beings which are able to reflect on their own doing, on their own responsibility, and who are candidates for that ethical arguments are addressed to him. To another animal you cannot address ethical arguments, that's impossible. So that's perhaps a little bit stupid, this argument, but it shows that the opposite arguments are perhaps even a little bit stupid.
Okay. And the final question, before I give also Urh the chance, is more related to medical ethics, and I'm interested what will you say. There are some theses that somehow the notion of responsibility gets perverted when we start to talk about accountability of doctors, answerability, liability, and that all these bureaucratic procedures like informed consent and all the forms that we need to fill actually diminish the responsibility of the doctor on the one hand, and on the other hand this proper autonomy of the patients, because it obstructs the genuine relationship that should hold between a patient and a doctor, or medical staff and a doctor. So what's your take on these problems or these points of view?
Yes, I think we are living in an age which transformed the principles of biomedical ethics. Before we had an ethics, we call it an ethics of paternalism, that was concentrated on the responsibility of the physician, of the person of the physician, and the patient said, "Oh doctor, you know at the best what is good for me." And this was the confidence he had in his doctor. It was a very personal relationship. This is no longer possible, because there's a good reason to accept this, because the possibilities of modern medicine has grown in an imminent way. So it's not a merely medical decision what is good for the patient. There are alternatives. Let's give an example. If you suffer from cancer and it's in the last period, you may try a last effort with a very, very strong, high concentrated medication, which has many side effects. And it depends on your personal situation if you would accept these side effects, these burdens on your quality of life. If you are an old person, and if you are able to accept dying, that you have to die once, so you may have good reasons not to accept a more treatment. But if you are a young mother who wants to see the ongrowing of her children, and perhaps one is coming the first time to school, or another will have his examen, or another perhaps his weddings, and you have the strong wish to be present at this event, you have good reasons to do all what is possible. But this is a personal decision and not only a medical decision. And so the position of physicians is be transformed. And on the other hand, there is the informed consent of the patient, and the physicians have the duty to do what they can that the patients have the possibility to form a well-informed personal consent. This is the duty of the physician, to give him the possibility, give him the informations, give him a good advice, and so on. But I don't think that these transformations should be so radical that the physician has no own responsibility. He only has to do what the patients, via its informed consents, wills from him. This is not the right new relation between physicians and patients. But the physician has its own responsibility, and he should never give a proposal to the patient which he couldn't accept for his own treatment, or for a treatment for a person of its own family, and so on. And so it remains the own responsibility of the physician, and the patient has no right to claim a certain treatment which the physician would not offer him, because he says, for my medical responsibility, I'm not convinced that this special treatment is reasonable and proportionate to your special health condition. But I know there are young physicians who say, oh, I only asked if there is the agreement, the informed consent of the patient, and if there is the informed consent, my duty is well done, and I have no longer problems. But I think this is too easy, and this is an erosion of a real medical responsibility.
I think we have one another question. One of the strongest parts of this book, which is very nicely written, is of course these end-of-life dilemmas. I think today you were talking in the morning a lot of it. I would actually ask, in this Catholic position towards artificial hydration, one sometimes it's sometimes really hard to figure out if it's already considered by these official teachings as a thing which could never be taken away. But as I read your book, there are some situations you think where also this hydration could become disproportionate. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about these artificial hydrations?
Yes, there was a long time where not only in the Catholic field but on all the field of medical ethics, there was one moral intuition that was accepted as valid, and that it's an absolute duty not to let die a suffering person by hunger. Not letting die them by hunger. That was an absolute duty. But now we start to think and put the question, what is meant when we say you have an absolute duty not to let die another person by hunger, by letting them hunger. The situation presupposed is that the other person shows the desire of nutrition. When we see a poster of the people in Africa who requires our generosity to help them, these are young child who have the desire, they want to eat, of course, they want to eat. But this is another situation when you compare this, let's say you have a very, very old person who suffers in a chronological way, and in the last phase, he or she renounces to accept eating. And now is the question, is it valid to say we have the absolute duty to overthrow this renouncement and to not only to offer him something to eat, but to put it into his body by medical measures? And this is a totally other situation. And even phenomenology, if you only see the way how you can do it, there's a great difference. If you can, to a sick person, you gave her to eat by assisting the normal function of adopting the nutrition. But if you only can do this by a totally artificial meanings, by a peck sound person, for instance, this is another situation which requires another ethical evaluation. So what I think, but I needed a certain way to come to this position, is that you have to distinguish all single cases, and you always have to clear for yourself what is the goal I want to reach with this special measure when I start the artificial nutrition. And there are many cases in which is, of course, necessary, and it's good and it's justified and the patient will require it and so on. This is the most of the cases. But there are cases in which I think it's acceptably morally not to start with artificial nutrition, especially when the patient not requires it or even refutes it. We can accept this, and we have no good arguments not to do so.
Darf ich jetzt hier anknüpfen mit einer ein bisschen provokativen Frage? Einerseits kennt man in der Kirche die Position, dass bei einem Sterbenden also das Essen und das Trinken einfach nicht abschaffen darf. Ja. Ne? Und mit künstlichen Mitteln muss man den Sterbenden praktisch bis zu Ende mit Wasser und Essen versorgen. Das ist ein künstlicher Weg, aufgrund dessen wir einem Sterbenden noch etwas sein Leben verlängern. Andererseits haben wir die große Diskussion über die künstlichen Verhütungsmittel, wo man die Position vertritt, in dem Fall darf man die künstlichen Mittel nicht brauchen. Also die Logik stimmt hier nicht. Ne? Vielleicht erklären Sie das ein bisschen, aber ich übersetze das jetzt. Ja sam rekao, jaz bom malo provokativno vprašanje se postavil na osnovi tega, kar je bilo rečeno. Ne? Po eni strani v cerkvi zagovarjamo stališče, da je potrebno umirajočega ohranjati pri življenju praktično do konca s pomočjo vode in hrane, se pravi, tega mu ne smeš odreči oziroma ga ne smeš odklopiti od vode in hrane. Ne? To je umetno sredstvo, tako kot je prej on razložil, s pomočjo katerega ga vzdržujemo pri življenju. Po drugi strani pa je pozicija cerkve, da ko pa gre za kontracepcijo, takrat pa umetna kontracepcija ni dovoljena, je dovoljena samo naravna pot. Torej gre za dvojno logiko znotraj istega sistema. Bitte schön.
I don't find this is as provocative as you said, because there is a real difficulty. The first is that the distinction of natural and artificial means has not in itself a decisive ethical value. If there is a natural means that can reach the same goal, there are many advantages for this natural means. That is clear, even in the field of contraception. But that not means that it's absolutely impossible on a moral point of view to accept artificial means, if there are, in a certain situation, effective, adequate and proportionate. And this is always the result of an individual decision and the evaluation of a concrete situation. And on the field of at the end of the life, it's not true that the Church in its history and the moral theology in its history always said that you have a moral obligation to use all the means which are possible to maintain your life. We had in the Middle Ages a discussion of monks who are living a very rigid form of ascetic life, are due to eat, to have a good nutrition, even in the time where are obeyed to renounce to Fleisch, to meal. Yeah? If they have a moral obligation to save their life on eating meals, they have the spiritual value of an ascetic life, that was their form of life, but now on this way they could shorten their life, but if they would eat meal they could prolong it. But the answer of the moral theologians was no, there is no obligation to prolong your life by using extraordinary means. Or in the 17th century we had the discussion that a physician started operations which caused very hard pain to the people, and it was the question if you are morally obliged to suffer such pains for the possibility to prolong your life. And the answer was no. You have no moral obligation to use extraordinary means. And if you take this to the modern possibilities, the answer is the same. You have no moral obligation to use all possible means to prolong your life. And I explained in the morning that it's better to speak of proportionate and disproportionate means that's a better distinction than extraordinary and ordinary, because what is ordinary and extraordinary, that depends many of the changes in medicine and the progress and so on. But if there is a proportionate relation between a certain measure and a certain therapeutical goal, this is an internal relation, and so I think this is the better distinction.
Dankeschön. Also wir haben Recht zum Sterben.
Yes, we have a right to die and not to be disturbed in the process of dying by artificial measures and therapeutical interventions who are no longer proportionate to the goal of facilitating the dying process and giving a medication only with the palliative goal.
Thank you. Jaz mislim, da mi trije smo svoje vprašanja izčrpali. Seveda bi še imeli marsikaj vprašati, ampak ni korektno do vas, ki ste prišli in ki vas tudi kaj zanima. Zato prosim, če se javite k besedi in še kaj vprašate.
Ja, ich werde fragen, gesund zu sein, muss man auch, wie sagt man,
Krankheit.
Krank sein. Als Sie was gesagt haben, die Krankheit ist auch ein Wert, nicht nur Gesundheit. Wenn ich nicht krank wäre, dann konnte ich nicht sagen, dass ich auch gesund bin. Das ist auch eine Sicherheit. Und ich gratuliere Ihnen, ich habe 5-mal schon Ihr Buch durchgelesen.
Und du begnadet, der so viel Zeit hast.
Das ist völlig richtig. Gesundheit meint nicht einfach die völlige Abwesenheit von körperlichen Störungen, sondern Gesundheit meint die Fähigkeit, das eigene Leben und die eigenen Lebensaufgaben auch unter einschränkenden Bedingungen aufrechterhalten zu können. Und wir haben heute, das hat mal jemand gesagt, paradox, ein krankes Verhältnis zur Gesundheit, weil wir meinen, wir müssen immer nur möglichst vollständig gesund sein und wir müssen die Gesundheit auch noch erhöhen. Ja, wir müssen auch noch versuchen, immer gesünder zu werden. Und das ist ein Weg ohne Ende, eine Reise ohne Ende, denn es geht uns nie so gut, dass es uns nicht noch etwas besser gehen könnte.
Kaj bi bilo treba prevajati? Ne. Kolega Brane.
Okay, I ask a question in English. Moral theology is always embedded in the theology in general. Your position is well articulated because you showed how you try to equilibrate two extremes. But what I'm asking is, how much is the discussion still ongoing? Because in general, the theology today, I think, is still well in discussion about what is, I don't know, the universal mission of the Christian ethic, or shall we rely on reason solely? What are the discussions? Because moral theology can't be excluded from the general discussion in theology. So, and I think your position is really good, and it's really in a sort of, in an equilibrium. But on the other hand, how much do you engage in discussion with your fellow moral theologians or theological ethicists, and of course also the systematic theology, even at your faculty? How much is this discussion present?
First of all, it's to give a realistic answer. It's true that the process of specialization is widespread today, even among the various theological disciplines. So our way to formulate our arguments and the way to think within the field of dogmatic theology is there are no differences and no critical antagonistic points, but it's difficult to understand and to hold it worthy for the totality of theology what always the others are doing on their own field. That is really a problem. But I think that every theology, even fundamental theology and dogmatic theology, has the scope today and must formulate his own arguments in a manner that it's possible to understand his anthropological sense. In the continuing of Karl Rahner, we speak of the anthropological transformation of Christian theology. And I think this is really a necessary precondition to understand what means a theological argument. A theological argument which in no sense can formulate his anthropological relevance is no good theological argument, even if it's well founded in theological tradition and so on. So I think it's not really a totally different method that we are using in moral theology, but it's a common Aufgabe, task for every sort of theology. And then, in this point you are right, I think, and this is where I did a step more on I spoke of my teacher, Alfons Auer, and his formula in criticizing, integrating, stimulating function of the biblical revelation towards secular moral theory. And I think we can formulate this in a sense which materially is richer. And this is why I speak again of the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. And these are the three functions, are identically or equally or equivalent to those, but I can integrate more of the classical material themes of dogmatic theology, of systematic theology, in my own foundation of the Christian ethics and theological ethics. So for me, personally, I think it's important that the theological ethics is a part of systematic theology at the same time as it has a common platform with philosophical ethics, and this both, I think it's necessary.
Še kako vprašanje? Nisem videl dobene roke. Se lahko še kjer pojavi.
Am Ende haben Sie über Albert Schweitzer geschrieben. Und das ist sehr gut, weil wir wussten nicht so viel über Albert Schweitzer. Das Respektieren, das Leben von Menschen und Tieren und aller lebendiger Natur. Nein? Was meinen Sie über diese, kann man sagen, lebendige Frage heute?
Also Albert Schweitzer ist im heutigen theologischen und ethischen Gespräch sehr lebendig. Und zwar einmal mit seiner Ethik der Ehrfurcht vor dem Leben. Das ist für die ganze Frage des Umgangs mit der Natur, mit der Umweltethik wichtig. Aber dann auch, das ist jetzt mehr ein wissenschaftsinternes Argument, in den letzten Jahren wurden seine Aufzeichnungen, die bis dahin unpubliziert waren, die er in Afrika, nachdem er tagsüber gearbeitet hat im praktischen Dienst als Arzt, hat er sie in den Abendstunden und bei Nacht hat er Tausende von Seiten geschrieben. Und die wurden in den letzten Jahren veröffentlicht. Und das ist natürlich auch ein Grund, sich damit zu beschäftigen, wenn das Material zugänglich ist. Und dann hatte ich noch einen ganz persönlichen Grund. Albert Schweitzer wirkte in Straßburg und Straßburg ist im Elsass und das ist Also das ist für uns so eine geistige Einheit. Und dann ökumenisch, Albert Schweitzer ist ein protestantischer Theologe und ich denke, es gehört auch zum Stil der heutigen Theologie, dass man als katholischer Theologe genauso die Anregungen von evangelischen Theologen ernst nimmt, wie man das umgekehrt auch von ihnen erwartet. Ja, genau. Er hat, also Albert Schweitzer ist es zu verdanken, dass das Orgelwerk von Bach wieder in seiner Bedeutung entdeckt wurde. Das hat er hat auch eine Biografie über Bach geschrieben.
Še kako vprašanje? Ja, če ni, potem bomo počasi zaključili. Dobro. Herr Professor, herzlichen Dank für die ausführlichen Antworten und für die gute Begründung und besonders herzlichen Dank, dass das Buch auch in Slowenisch erschienen konnte, auch mit Ihrer finanziellen Hilfe. Dankeschön. Das ist sehr selten.